Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Antoinette Barber, Director of Communications and Utility Management Programs with AMWA, and I'm pleased to work with our partner, CDM Smith, to bring you this important topic: what's happening next, emerging contaminants, new PFAS, and beyond. Before we dive in, I have a few housekeeping items that I would like to go over. First, this webinar is being recorded today. Slides and the recording will be made available on AMWA's website at amwa.net tomorrow and also in our upcoming Monday morning briefing. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we want your engagement, so please feel free to ask us any questions and put them in the chat. Now, I'd like to introduce the moderator for today, Mark White, who is CDM Smith's Drinking Water Practice Leader. Mark, the webinar is in your capable hands.
Great. Thank you, Antoinette. As you said, my name is Mark White, and I will be your moderator today for what's happening next, emerging contaminants, new PFAS, and beyond. Before we begin, I would like to introduce our panelists and review today's agenda. First up will be GM, who is a principal engineer at CDM Smith, assisting multiple utilities across the country to evaluate and address PFAS and other emerging contaminants. Next up will be Melissa Olenek, who is the Operations Manager and Safety Coordinator at Central Lake County Joint Action Water Agency in Northern Illinois. And our third panelist today will be Chase Holmgren. Chase is the Assistant Director of Water Treatment at Dallas Water Utilities. At the start of the program today, each panelist will spend a few minutes talking about their background with PFAS and contaminants of emerging concern monitoring. And then we will begin a discussion about preparing for the next wave of contaminants of emerging concern, and then open it up to take audience questions. As we said, we want your questions. We want you to be part of our discussion today. So please put your questions in the question panel should be at the top of your screen. So now, without further ado, I will pass it to G to begin our presentation.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is GM, like the G like the letter, and I am so excited to kick off this webinar with a brief presentation about the importance of tackling tomorrow's contaminants today. As we're about to spend the next hour together to focus on contaminants of emerging concern, or CECs, I hope to hit on these three messages to set the stage for us. First, the whole PFAS saga over the past decade has taught us an important lesson about how CECs become regulated, has changed substantially, and really highlighted the importance of taking proactive actions. Second, despite the current focus on PFAS like PFOA and PFOS, both federal and state regulators continue to pay attention to a larger suite of CECs beyond PFAS, and the general public is becoming more and more interested in tap water quality issues. Finally, there will be a lot of folks doing some sort of treatability testing for PFAS over the next year or so. And gosh, I really hope you make the most out of that challenge by looking at if any of the CECs that may be present in your water can also be removed by any of the PFAS treatment technologies. As I briefly mentioned, I think it's fair to say that the way PFAS became regulated really changed us as an industry. The community advocacy put the PFAS issue at the center of the state politics, which translated directly into very quick responses from state regulators. If you think what's going on with the EPA regulation right now is confusing, you should have been here in the Northeast from 2017 to 2021-ish. Some states were regulating individual compounds while others were regulating a sum of multiple PFAS. Every state was issuing their own health advisories or regulatory limits that felt like they were getting updated every year to either include more compounds or lower the levels from, say, 70 to 20 parts per trillion. So how quickly states moved to regulate PFAS across the country was shocking. Finally, the federal regulation went through a very unusual rulemaking process. The PFAS rule was proposed and finalized before we had the full set of occurrence data from UCMR5, and some compounds were not even finished with the final regulatory determinations yet. A brand new compliance approach like hazard index was included, and how various toxicological data sets were used was also very unusual. So overall, PFAS taught us that the way CECs become regulated has evolved significantly, which requires us to be more proactive and prepared when it comes to the next wave of emerging contaminants. Again, the public concerns for CECs continue to grow beyond PFAS. Here are just a few of many articles that brought attention to emerging water quality issues from major news outlets like NBC to local networks and popular organizations like EWG, covering anywhere from ultra short chain PFAS, 1,4-dioxane microplastics, tire wear compounds, to a chlorination disinfection pipe products that was newly discovered by researchers last year. But if you think what ends up in the news headlines are scary, you should look up tap water on social media. As an older millennial myself, I am not as familiar with TikTok as I would like, but I'll say the misinformation and fear mongering on tap water quality on the incredibly popular platform is highly concerning, which goes to show how we need to stay on top of emerging water quality issues as much as the public is Googling about it. Speaking of Google, I thought these three plots show a very interesting story on the public interest in drinking water. The top one is a Google search trend over the past 10 years for the word water. These plots are normalized based on the peak search frequency, and it's kind of cool because you can really see how people Google about water more during summer months. But overall, the search frequency remained pretty consistent or increasing slightly over the past 10 years for water. The middle plot is for the keyword PFAS, which shows a pretty dramatic increase in search results over the past few years. And you see the microplastics graph on the bottom, which has a similarly timed increasing trend, really following PFAS just behind it. So again, we need to care about some of these CECs as much as everyday consumers do. So let's get into some of the CECs that are getting a lot of attention and investigated throughout the country right now. This list can be much longer, but I had to draw a line somewhere with the limited time we have here. I'll try to review them as concisely as possible. So let's go back to where we started with PFAS. I'm using emerging PFAS as a very broad term to include polyfluoroalkyl substances that can be precursors and eventually become terminal products like PFOA, PFOS, short chain, and ultra short chain PFAS. They're especially concerning because these precursor compounds make up majority of firefighting foams that have contributed to so much of the environmental release. The conversation is also quickly shifting toward ultra short chain PFAS, which have carbon chain length between 1 and 3. I think highly prevalent is actually an understatement here because occurrence data, when collected, show that ultra short chains make up majority, say up to 98% of total PFAS concentrations. There are some important regulatory movements in various European countries like Denmark and Germany that we want to pay attention to also. A little fun fact, refrigerants from HVAC system are a significant source of precursors that become TFA or trifluoroacetic acid, as shown in the graphics here, which is a dominant ultra short chain compound in the environment. Next, the microbial and disinfection byproducts rule, or MDBP, is coming. The latest update on the EPA website shows summer of 2027 for the draft rule. And while we anticipate this rule will focus more on the microbial control through higher disinfectant residual, but until we know what gets actually included in the rule, we need to keep paying attention to the unregulated DBPs and their precursors, in addition to the currently regulated DBPs. Next, a number of pharmaceuticals and personal care products, as well as endocrine disrupting chemicals, have been part of previous monitoring and regulatory efforts. I like to think PPCPs and EDCs together, even though there are some differences. Like, for example, not all PPCPs are EDCs if they don't pose hormonal interferences or reproductive concerns. And EDCs are not always PPCPs either, since they can also include pesticides, herbicides, plastic compounds, and whatnot. Again, this list can be much longer, but I'm showing a few PPCPs and EDCs that are frequently detected and monitored, mostly coming from popular consumer products like caffeine, canned food, skincare products, herbicides used for your garden, and common medications like ibuprofen. Moving to 1,4-dioxane, which is a synthetic chemical that is already being actively monitored and regulated in some states through health advisories, MCLs, cleanup centers. Just last year, EPA's Toxic Substance Control Act program found that 1,4-dioxane poses an unreasonable risk of injury to health. As I mentioned earlier, lots of attention to microplastics in terms of their presence in tap water, as well as all the research on plastic pollution. Many states are slowly but surely following in the footsteps of California with their own regulations on source control, analytical method development, public outreach, and monitoring requirements. Despite the analytical challenges that makes collecting broader occurrence data pretty difficult at the moment, the public interest in this topic continues to grow, including now, nanoplastics. I'll try to step through these next 5 CECs a bit quicker. Strontium is still under the EPA's regulatory evaluation. And of course, we cannot ignore what our neighbor Canada is doing, as they set the maximum acceptable concentration for it a few years ago. Manganese currently has an SMCL of 50 micrograms per liter, but lots of toxicology data have found that it can have health impacts on vulnerable populations. So the health assessment is planned to be studied further by EPA. Also, on top of all this, UCMR3 data for manganese show that lots of systems exceeded the generally recommended threshold of 20 micrograms per liter. On the third compound, you see TCP or 1,2,3-trichloropropane, which is an organic solvent that is still under the regulatory evaluation by EPA. But it's important to note that TCP has been regulated by the state of California since 2017 at a very low level of 5 parts per trillion. From the ongoing UCMR5 sampling, we've heard a lot about lithium. The results so far show that a surprising portion of water systems exceed the health-based screening level, especially in the Southwest region. Finally, the tire compounds are capturing a lot of attention with the focus mostly on 6-ppdquinone that was discovered as the toxin that was killing a shocking number of coho salmon in the Northwest. As I mentioned earlier, this list can be much longer to include contaminants like perchlorate, Legionella, algal and others. But no matter what CECs you're investigating, it's important to remember and navigate that each contaminant currently faces a different set of challenges than the rest and the others, from analytical capabilities to availability of health studies, occurrence data, treatment data, or all of the above. Many utilities will be likely performing pilot testing for PFAS removal over the next year or so. And good news is that this potential treatment addition may be able to provide co-removal of some other CECs. So while you're already investing time and resources to study the effectiveness of PFAS treatment alternatives, it can be an efficient opportunity to evaluate their performance on CEC removal also. This table lists the 3 types of best available technologies for PFAS removal, and these technologies are known to effectively remove some CECs, but pilot testing is critical to confirm and investigate their capabilities. I'll say a great first step is to start by characterizing your source water for their potential presence of CECs. You can start by reviewing all of the available internal and external data out there on their levels in your water or similar sources, and also looking into available analytical methods and their potential shortcomings that may impact the interpretation of your results, which are common for these emerging contaminants analysis. Finally, mostly for the purpose of saving analytical costs, because these methods could be pretty expensive, once you confirm that your target CECs are present in your source water, then you can pursue investigating their treatability. If there's no pilot testing in your immediate future, coming up with an emerging contaminants strategy or monitoring plan is definitely where you want to start. And that is the topic that our next presenters will dive into further. So with that, thank you so much. And I look forward to hearing from my fellow presenters and doing the panel discussion.
Okay, thank you, G. That was great. My name is Melissa, like Mark had said. I am from, can you go ahead and advance the slide? I am from Central Lake County Joint Action Water Agency. And I am just going to give you a brief overview of the water treatment facility that we have here. So we are located in northern Illinois, right on the border of Wisconsin and Illinois, on the Lake Michigan. So our source water is Lake Michigan. It's a very pristine source water. It requires very little treatment. Our facility was built, took 2.5 years to build, and we opened our doors in 1992 and began treating water. We are unique in that we are a wholesale non-for-profit water treatment plant. So our member communities, and we have 13 member communities who own the water plant. We treat the water and we send it out through our distribution system that you see there on that map. And that distribution system is over 55 miles of pipeline. So it's a pretty small distribution system because we're sending the water to the town, and those member communities, they take control of the water then, and they distribute it out to their customers. So our total population served is 286,000 customers, but we only have 13 members or 13 communities and 25 service connections in our system. Next slide, please. We are a conventional treatment process. You can see pictured here in the schematic. We are rated for maximum capacity 50 million gallons per day, and our average right now is 17 million gallons per day. We take the water from Lake Michigan and we are dosing it with potassium permanganate at that intake for quagga mussel and zebra mussel control. The water is then coming in through our raw water pump station and then travels to our treatment plant, the Paul Neal treatment plant in Lake Bluff, Illinois. At that time, it's going to go through the conventional process, and we are unique in that we have both ozone and ultraviolet radiation. Next slide, please. Here you can see our Mitsubishi ozone generators. We're taking outside air, converting that air into a 95% pure oxygen, and then converting that to ozone. We use ozone for taste and odor control only, so not for disinfection purposes. Next slide. After that, the water will get its dose of coagulant and go to our flocculation process, where we have 3-stage flocculation, and then move on to our sedimentation. So next slide. We also have lamella diagonal settling basins for a quicker and more efficient settling process. And the plant is divided up into four process trains. And this really allows us flexibility when trying to optimize for proper chemical dosing. And so we've been able to optimize our treatment process very efficiently. Next slide. We have 12 filters that the water is then passed through. Our filters are deep bed filters. There's 4 feet of granular active carbon, 1 foot of sand, and 1 foot of gravel. 3 of our filters have new granular active carbon that was just installed in the last 2 years. And the other 9 filters are actually the original carbon from when the plant opened in 1992. So that carbon is 33 years old, which means it's no longer active. And those filters are biologically active filters. So we are in the process of slowly changing over the carbon on all 12 of our filters eventually. Next slide. After filtration, we have ultraviolet disinfection. We have Trojan UV reactors down in that process, and that is to help us with virus and bacterial inactivation. And that is because we are taking surface water, so there is the chance of Cryptosporidium and Giardia. Next slide. We have 6 pumps that we're pushing our water out into the distribution system. We have a very large pipe distribution system. We start at 48-inch pipe and go down to 12-inch at the end. But because we are wholesale and really just pushing water to communities, we have quite a bit of an slide. For our treatment process, we are using sodium hypochlorite as our disinfectant, so we are not using gas. And then we also have phosphoric acid for corrosion control, as well as fluoride being added because the state of Illinois does require that. Next slide. So we began testing for emerging contaminants at CLC Jawa back in the early 2000s. So we've been sort of ahead of the curve in terms of emerging contaminants. We started early on with industrial chemicals back in 2004, and we moved on to then pharmaceuticals and stimulants and hormones, many of the ones that G had mentioned, as well as personal care products. We've been testing them annually in the raw and the finished water in order to see what's coming in from Lake Michigan, as well as what's being removed in our treatment process. In 2008, we also began testing for PFAS. We started with PFOA and PFOS, and we have been detecting both of those in Lake Michigan as well as in our finished water since we started in 2008. And so in 2017, we started testing for short chains as well. So we've now tested for 29 of the PFAS in both the Lake Michigan water as well as our finished water. In 2017, we started testing for artificial sweeteners. So acesulfame K and sucralose were added to the mix. And in 2019, we began testing for microplastics. And it's been sort of a tough one to be testing for because the methodology has really changed quite a bit. And so it's hard to compare results from year to year because many of the methods used in 2019 through 2021 were very rudimentary. So this last year, we've been testing with a much better methodology, and we've been trying to gather data on microplastics as well. With all of our emerging contaminant testing, we try to have 100% transparency. So our goal is to release a detailed water quality report every year that lists everything that we've detected in both of our raw water and our finished water systems. So we put all of that out on our website as well as send it out to all of our member communities so that they can get that detailed water quality report and see what we've detected in the water. And so one of our most, basically when taking on emerging contaminant testing, the most important thing for us is making sure that we can disseminate that information out to our public so that we know what's in our water, and we can also put that out to our member communities as well. That's it. Thank you.
So I'm with Dallas Water Utilities, and I'm excited to kind of share with you our program and how we're managing this topic. Next slide. Perfect. All right, so DWU was established in 1881, and we are a one water utility. We're a regional provider of water, wastewater, stormwater, and flood control services. And we have a very large service area of nearly 700 square miles. We have 3 surface water treatment plants with a capacity of up to 900 million gallons a day. And we're serving nearly 2.6 million people, about 50-50 split between City of Dallas retail customers and then the other customers being customer cities. Next slide. Think about the scale of what we're doing and the resources required. We have nearly $6.5 billion in assets, over 1,600 employees, and we've got a combined annual operating and capital budget of nearly $1.3 billion. And so I was thinking about what does all this mean, and really I think a lot about public trust and stewardship here, and that means a couple of things to us. It really we want to preserve the system that we've already paid for and invested in, and 2, we want to make smart bets on what's coming down the line. Today's webinar really focuses on a core piece of that stewardship. CECs are one of the many pressures that we're facing. Those impacts are really real, and they have some serious implications on the treatment techniques that we're employing in our facilities, as well as some significant possible impacts for your operations and capital budget. Next slide. So if we dig in a little bit further, give you an idea about what we're doing and how we're doing it. We have 7 reservoirs, 6 of which are connected to the system and 1 that's oncoming. And there are some limited capabilities for some rotation of sources at our plants and some blending. All 3 of our drinking water treatment plants are using conventional treatment techniques like coagulation, flocculation, and sedimentation. And all 3 are also employing ozone as a primary disinfectant. We are also utilizing chloramines throughout the system, really helping us control disinfection byproduct formation, as well as getting those residuals out into that large service area. For the past 20 years or so, I'd say the focus for Dallas Water Utilities has really been about optimizing the plants. We're proud participants in the Partnership for Safe Drinking Water program, as well as participants in the Texas Optimization program, both of which has some very, very strict turbidity requirements, among other things. And then more recently, we've been really focused on enhancing the water quality in our distribution system, really ensuring that the water leaving the plants is stable all throughout that system. And so there's been a big focus on organics removal, whether that's through enhanced coagulation at our facilities or also biological filtration. And so I say all that to say, these treatment techniques that I'm sharing with you today don't necessarily, effectively address some of those contaminants that are coming down the pipeline. Next slide. So a few years ago, we developed a water facility strategic plan, which really is a comprehensive look at all of our facilities. We looked at performance limiting factors. We looked at what kind of resources we were utilizing, and we compared ourselves to other utilities across the nation of similar size. We have a 10-year and 30-year capital plan that's built into that. But we wanted to make sure that we were kind of future ready. And one key component of our strategic plan is developing a CEC monitoring program. So the idea is really to make sure that we're proactive, we're ready for whatever's coming down in the future, especially when it comes to regulatory compliance, and we wanted to make sure that we were operationally ready. This program was really, the scope of it, of which is really deciding what CECs we want to really monitor, developing a schedule and a frequency for testing those things, and ultimately we wanted something that was going to give us some data to help us make some decisions. And also, if a customer is asked, we could showcase that we are sampling for many of the things that they're paying close attention to. Next slide. So just kind of getting that program ready, Dallas Water Utilities has multiple process laboratories across all of our water and wastewater facilities, but none of which are equipped to handle the CEC sampling program that we were wanting to implement. So really one of the first key components for us was really reaching out and looking at some accredited laboratories, working with these external labs to develop master agreements or contracts, if you will, discussing what kind of constituents we're going to be monitoring and how we're going to do it. Some of the other things that we really kept in mind was about logistics, pre-labeled bottles and kits, chain of custody. We're talking about shipping timelines and really communicating with the vendor about how to make this all happen. Another big item for us was staff training. These are many constituents that we're not used to sampling, and many of them are very susceptible to contamination and those kind of things. So implementing standard operating procedures, training staff, using things like a PFAS avoidance checklist were critical. And training our team. As with anything else, and especially when it relates to labs, that QA/QC piece, we're developing some strategies for making sure that the data integrity was there, whether that's fill blanks or duplicates and those kind of things. And last, the data workflow, really getting some electronic data deliverables, getting that data into some kind of view where we could share across our team, and getting consistent naming conventions and something that we could actually compare month to month and plant to plant. Next slide. So here's a look at our initial CEC sampling protocol and frequency. Very first key item for us, obviously for regulatory reasons, is PFAS. We've established some frequency there monthly at all of our locations. Some of the other constituents you see would do every other month. Some of these things are like cyanotoxins, and we even built in some frequencies like, we sample a little more often when it's more likely that we might see a harmful algal bloom. So, some of this is a little more flexible, but most of the time we're looking at all these things monthly. And I don't want you to, this list looks kind of small, but there's over 100 constituents here, these pharmaceuticals and hormones. There's over 70 of those in general. PFAS is like a suite of 30 of those. So it's actually a quite large program. Everything that you see here is sampled right here at the raw water intake for each one of our treatment facilities. And remember, we're using multiple sources, so they had to kind of combine that into the puzzle. And then we also try to time the sampling of the finished water to kind of make sure that we get a good idea about what's coming into the facility, what treatment is actually occurring, if there's any kind of removal of any of these constituents, and then monitoring what's leaving the facilities. Next slide. So remember, we started just a couple of years ago and kind of talk about where we are today. We're a large organization. We've got a lot of moving parts. And so in some ways, it's kind of hard. We're kind of siloed. So you picture the 3 water treatment plants are all sampling. We also have a source water team and a team that's monitoring distribution water quality. So really, we decided that we were going to build a cross-functional team that was going to bring all these members together at least once a month. And one of the key things that they're doing is really talking about this particular CEC program. They meet monthly, they look at the results and protocols, they talk about standard operating procedures. We're also looking at adjusting the frequency of much of our sampling. I mean, this is going to be something that we're going to adapt to and change in the future. So if we're seeing more of a particular constituent in one of our locations, we'll increase the frequency of sampling there, while in other places reduce the sampling. We're evaluating new analytes. We're paying close attention to what's coming down the regulatory pipeline. And I think that this program has really led to some actionable results for us. While most of these contaminants in the industry that we're seeing here are really not a concern for us, there's a few that have maybe stood out as possible things that we need to look at very closely. On the PFAS front for Dallas Water, there's one plant that sees some numbers more than the other facilities, and we're watching that close. The data that we gathered from this particular monitoring program is really helping us to pilot some solutions, look at maybe doing some in-depth studies on this particular analyte, and it's really been invaluable to us to help us make some good decisions about what's going to happen in the future. And that's all I have. I'd be glad to talk with the panel.
Thank you, Chase, Melissa, and G. Let's get everyone's cameras back on. Perfect. So really interesting. So really, thank you for sharing that. We've got a discussion we're going to enter into now, but I just wanted to make sure that all of the audience knows that the question chat function is open. So please get your questions in, because that's what we'll move to next. But to start off our discussion here, I guess first I wanted to start big picture and in your motivation and what was kind of leading to implementing these programs, and so maybe start with Chase. I like the term you used, making Dallas wanted to make sure it was future ready, and I think that says a lot right there. So I guess maybe just spend another couple of minutes talking about implementing this. Was there any resistance to measuring compounds that aren't regulated? I know this takes some budget allocations, and if not, is there any advice to utilities that may run into those challenges in how they can convince folks that this is really a wise investment for the future?
Sure. So, I touched a little bit on being future ready. Much of these treatment technologies, if you do find one of these constituents that you need to address, they're not easily implementable, right? Even the robust system that Dallas has, we are having to look at something much different, whether that's GAC or ion resin exchange, those kind of things. And those are huge investments that require a lot of study. So, the key thing for us is getting ahead of these things well in advance of any regulatory requirements, getting a good understanding about what's there or what's not there. And, that's going to give our capital team and our budget team a chance to really get prepared for what might be coming down the pipeline. I think another piece of this puzzle that really helps kind of push this for me is, like G was talking about earlier, whether it's true data or not, or whatever you find on TikTok or what's out there, but the search is say that people are more invested and involved in what's going on in their water. And so they see this, they're searching for these kind of things. And so how nice is it that as a utility, we're able to, have a conversation with those customers and really talk to them about what's in their water and what's not, and what to be concerned about and what's not, rather than just coming and saying, I don't have anything other than a UCMR data set. So I think that's another way to look at it.
Thanks, Chase. And to start with a similar question to you, Melissa. You had mentioned the pristine source water that Lake Michigan is often considered, and I guess what were the drivers then for Central Lake County to start this program way back over 20 years ago?
Well, and I have to, full disclosure, I was not here when the program started. So it was not me who started the emerging contaminant testing. But the real motivation for it was to know more about our water than anyone else, right? So that somebody calls and they want to know if something's in our water or in Lake Michigan, we already know whether it's in the lake. And so it was really we wanted to be the ones to figure it out. So and I will say, like back in the early 2000s, it was there. We did get a little bit of resistance from other utilities who didn't agree with us testing for emerging contaminants, who thought we shouldn't be looking for problems. We should just stick with regulatory testing and not go out and look for other things that might be in the water. And so we kind of were, ahead of the curve, like I said, and with that, releasing that information to people so that we gave them that information. And what that really gave us is such confidence in our water, so that when new regulations are coming out, like PFAS, we can already go back and say, hey, we've been testing for this for 20 years, and we have this data. We know what's in the water. We can show you that trend. We can show you what we've been seeing. And so it gives our customers confidence in us then, because we've already known about it. We've already told them about it in a report. So it really is confidence for us to be able to know what we're delivering, and that we have good quality water.
Excellent, excellent. Now, I think you'd mentioned you share that through your consumer confidence reports primarily and websites. Has there been much questions from the public then on these? If you put a new contaminant up there, I'm just curious if you've gotten much public then has something to react to. But
yeah, we always put the detailed report out with a description of what it is, the amount we're measuring. We try to put it in context, because that's the most important thing. Is I can tell somebody it's in the water, but if I don't tell them how much or what that actually means, it's very hard for them to understand. And so we're always trying to put it in a context that the customer can understand. And we have had some things that we've measured for that. For instance, we did DNA testing of the water one time, and it sounded very interesting to do that. We wanted to see what was the DNA breakdown of our water, and so we tested it at multiple points throughout the facility. And then we got a list of these genus and species and percentages, and we realized that that was not something we can disseminate to our customers. How can we tell them what 0.02% of this genus is? And so it has to be testing that we could actually quantify into what it means for our water quality. And so not all testing has been good. There's some things we've learned that we don't want to test for, because it's not giving us information that we can compare and put into context for what the quality of the drinking water is. So our goal is always good data that we can then.
Interesting. Thank you. Chase, I guess continue on a similar topic on community outreach and communication of these results that you've gotten. It sounds like you've got at least a couple of years of data now through this program. Curious if you've gotten much feedback from the public or reactions to this data.
I think, for some of the items that stand out, PFAS specifically, we've developed some fact sheets and we've developed some forward-facing websites that really help communicate that information to the public and get, a concise effort done there. I think for other analytes, perchlorate and those kind of things, 1,4-dioxane, we're not seeing a lot of, communications from the public when it comes down to those things. But one thing I'd like to kind of highlight that we take a lot of consideration into is really, you saw the scope and scale of our organization. We've got a lot of employees, whether you're working in the distribution system or whether you're a mechanic inside of one of our treatment plants or electrician or electronic tech. And so one of the things that we do is we develop fact sheets for things like microplastics, and we spend time teaching all of our team members, whether you're in operations or the lab or not, about what these constituents are. Oftentimes these people are the ones who are going home and they're talking to their family, and they have many friends who say, oh, you work at the utility, what is such and such, right? So one of the things we really do in-house is really share what's going on, provide some basic knowledge and understanding, and really getting everybody on the same page so we can share that effort out.
Interesting. Switch gear a little bit, and Melissa, I just wanted to take advantage of the duration that you've been testing. With over 20 years of data, I can imagine that analytical methods have evolved and changed, and the fact that many of these especially when they're emerging, they don't necessarily have EPA standards, and so detection limits, and testing methods may change. Just curious how you've dealt with that, or how much of a challenge that's been.
It's been a little bit of a challenge, especially even UCMR testing. So we were testing for PFAS, PFOA, PFOS, and when UCMR 3 came out, that minimum reporting limit went to 20. Well, then for 2 years, right, we got non-detects, which sort of skews the data, and we know we always had it, right? It wasn't a non-detect, it was just because the methodology changed during that time. And so that's the one that was the biggest problem. We do have some issue with methodology changing and minimum detection limits going up and down. And so something might look like we no longer detect it, right? Because that methodology changes, but really it's just because we raised the level. So it's a little bit of a challenge when we're comparing things, but I try to put notes, and we always bring in the methodology so that we can go back and find where those trends happen. The microplastics is the one that we're struggling the most with, because the methodology has, every year it's been a little bit different, and it's also not comparable to other studies you see. So you might see a study out and they say, oh, there's this many particles in beer or this many particles in bottled water. But if they're not using the same test that we are, we can't say what that means for our water. So it's that standardization of a method across the board that makes it very hard to put that number out to somebody. What is 10 particles in the water mean? Is that high or low? And so that's a lot of the struggle, is trying to determine what does it really mean in terms of water quality, and making sure you're getting that message out to your customers.
Interesting. With your testing, as long as it's been, have you been seeing many trends with is what you're measuring relatively stable, ignoring the detection, non-detection limits, or do you see things going up or going down in the lake?
In Lake Michigan, we're really seeing a trend down, especially in the last 4 to 5 years for emerging contaminants. And so many of the things that I detected quite frequently in the raw water are being non-detect right now. PFAS is the one that's sort of holding steady, right? That one hasn't really changed in the last 20 years that we've been testing for it. But many of the emerging contaminants have actually moved to a non-detect. Not necessarily that they're gone, but we're not detecting them, as well as in our finish. So it's a good trend, and I'm not sure necessarily if it's because the water quality is better, or we've had Lake Michigan levels are up higher. So it could just be due to lake level. It could be due to the temperature shifts that we've been experiencing as well. It could also be that it's a grab sample, and we're usually always right at just above detection when we're looking at a lot of these emerging contaminants. That's where we're seeing it. So there's also this, there's a certain amount of error that could be falling into it as well. So it's hard at this point to know what's truly driving the trend, but we are seeing a trend in the positive.
Okay, that's happy to hear that. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and put a question out to G here. G, you'd mentioned that many systems are looking at either some treatability for PFAS or treatability for other contaminants they may be dealing with, and that implementing a CEC program into that testing is a great opportunity. And I guess I just wanted to see if you could maybe expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah, of course. I think a lot of folks are looking into coming into compliance with the federal regulation. I think state agencies continue to set their own regulations also alongside. So I think it's really important, as a lot of utilities are spending next years investigating PFAS, right? And a lot of resources going into it. It takes many months to do bench or pilot testing. Then it takes a year or more to design. Then it takes 1, 2, 3 years, depending on the size of the system, to construct the facility. And 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the road, the worst thing I want utilities to do is, oh my gosh, now the MDBP came out, and now I'm going to have to keep my chlorine residual higher, and now I might violate my total HHM or HA5, right? So really being that future proof, as Chase mentioned, and getting the most bang for the buck in terms of the money and resources you're spending on PFAS treatment. I just don't want our utilities to, miss out on those, time sensitive chances to look at other CECs that will help them with simultaneous compliance in the future.
Great, great. Well, with that, we've got a number of questions starting to come in on our question panel here. So please keep them coming. But I want to make sure that within the time we've got left, we can work to address some of these questions. I just kind of starting here at the top here. There was a question. Does GAC remove long chain PFAS or long chain PFA like PFAS and PFOA?
Yes, GAC is often a effective removal technology for long chain compounds, but it's really important to qualify that because it's very size specific. It really depends on your water quality. If you have really challenging water, so when I say it works, it's going to work. It's going to treat down to non-detect for a certain period of time, and when that media capacity is exhausted, you're going to see the contaminant breakthrough slowly creeping up. So really the true question is how long it's going to remove down to non-detect for, and how long it's going to take until you have to change that media out. And yes, GAC is generally one of the best available technologies for long chain PFAS, especially PFOS and PFOA. But testing is critical to evaluate the long-term operational impacts and costs on its effectiveness.
Great, thank you. A question here, and I guess I'll put this to Chase first. Did you consider with your governing board's legal counsel any potential risks of obtaining this data? And I assume that must be related to lawsuits or regulations or customers then saying this was in the water. Just curious.
I don't know how much I can speak to that component and how much was done before my time here, but I think that we're treating the data very sensitively, right? We're keeping things in draft and really just trying to keep a tight constraint on what we're monitoring and what we're sharing.
Okay. I guess Melissa, to you as well. Was there any consideration with that?
We have. Because we put it into a detailed water quality report, we're putting it out to the public. We have tried, we actually have talked with our regulatory agency and we've sent them data before, especially early on, right, of some of the testing we've done, but they're like, please don't send that because it's not regulatory. So although they know that we do additional testing, they don't want necessarily us to be sending that data to them. It's even when the state of Illinois actually conducted their own PFAS study before US EPA started to consider regulations. And they had come around to all of the water utilities to do source water testing. And at that time, I had even told them I have quite a bit of data, and they wanted to just do the test, just handle it the way they were supposed to. So they're really there's really no direction from them in terms of what we do with that data. They consider it our own internal information.
Great. Let's see, next one here. There are a couple of questions on asking that the slides be shared. And so, yes, I do believe that that in addition to the link for the recording, so that you can re-listen and watch the recording, and pause it, but I think there's also the slides are also planning to be shared as well. A question, I guess maybe to G. It says, with your crystal ball, with the current administration, do you see regulation increases coming for CECs in the near future?
Well, what I know for sure I could tell you is the EPA's intention is that they will issue the revised draft PFAS rule this fall, which I think will be divided in the year. If I have to crystal ball it, their intention was pretty clear that 4 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS are staying. I think that's really important because majority of the water utilities that will violate MCL from the federal rule will be on PFO and PFOS. Everything else, the hazard index, individual MCL for 10 parts per trillion, in my opinion, is a distraction because it just impacts so few utilities across the country. So that's my crystal balling, even though I know a lot of folks are hopeful that those 4 parts per trillion will be increased, but that's my personal crystal ball telling me. NDVP is very real. It was supposed to be this year and it got delayed from all of the chaos that's going on in DC. The summer of 2027 timeline that I mentioned, that was updated on the EPA website just really a few months ago since the new administration took over. So we really need to watch out for MDVP and how that's going to impact our finished water requirements. And I do think for a few of those contaminants that I mentioned that's still undergoing the regulatory evaluation. They're kind of like postponed status right now, but I do think EPA will kind of get going on those. There are occurrence data, there are health data. So those few that I've specifically mentioned that are under kind of postponed regulatory evaluation, I think it'll keep going. I am also very worried about microplastics. There is very limited occurrence data. There's very limited health data, but the way the public has interacted with the concept, similar to how the public really held on to, the forever chemicals, it's in my children's blood level, right? That relatable nature of microplastics really concerns me in terms of how it's going to come to our industry in form of any regulations and whatnot. So that's my crystal balling to my best ability.
Yeah, and to maybe kind of add on from what you had talked about earlier, the what happens at the state level is completely different from what happens at the federal administration level. And it seems like if PFAS was any example, and it's certainly these regulations could keep going forward based on the state level and reacting to consumer demands.
Yeah, and there's certainly a lot of state efforts to at least start monitoring, right? So yeah, Mark, you're spot on.
It came across from Melissa regarding being a wholesale customer and supplying water to multiple of your communities. Do any of the communities do their own treatment or express interest on additional removal of PFAS or their own treatment? That was one of the questions.
So all of our member communities rely on us to treat, basically, and we are responsible. It's part of our contract that we are responsible for treatment of the water. They may boost chlorine in their system, so some of them have the ability to boost chlorine, and so they're doing their own disinfection byproduct testing, that type of thing in their system, which does vary from our system. But we are considered, from an EPA standpoint, we are the parent, they are the satellite, and so we are responsible for treatment at the plant here. And if anything happens, like with PFAS, we would remove it here at the facility and we would treat it. But that decision, so currently our PFAS, our PFOA, PFOS levels are just above 2. So we're not near the 4, which is coming down, but it would be our members would be the ones who would discuss whether we would put in treatment to remove it. So because we are a joint action water agency, they basically processes, so they still have a say in removing it. It would just happen here at the treatment facility.
Chase, a question came across for you. Thanks for mentioning cyanotoxins. The questioner said, and they asked, do you monitor in-house with ELISA for cyanotoxins?
Yes, no, all of our sampling is done in external laboratories like Eurofins.
Okay. A question came across for both Chase and Melissa. Are there any regulatory programs, which I assume would be kind of at the state level in your regions, that are focusing on pinpointing some of the sources for various emerging contaminants and putting regulations in to better control these from getting into the source versus at the treatment plant. So maybe Melissa.
I think it's something that I think it's not a big focus, right? It's easier to regulate at the drinking water level or at the wastewater level than it is at the source water. And so I think, like most states, more of the phosphorus disposal coming from wastewater facilities is something that's being monitored more than I believe they're trying to really pinpoint source water pollution. They did ask us during the PFAS study that the IEPA did, they were trying to ask each utility if they knew where the source was, but they were trying to get the utilities to figure out source, so the point source. We do source water studies. Illinois is requiring all of us to do a source water study as a utility. So we have to put in play a source water protection plan. And so again, putting it on the utility, I think, more than putting it on those that are contributing to the problem.
I mean, Melissa, it's so hard when it's literally raining PFAS in low single-digit parts per trillion, right? So.
Chase, I guess the same for you. Are there any programs in Texas in your region kind of focused on limiting some of these CECs from getting into our water supplies or controlling them at the source?
I'm not aware of any in the state of Texas. I know others like Massachusetts and California might be implementing things like that, but at the Texas level, I'm not sure.
A question came across, I guess it maybe start with Chase. For some of the CECs you're monitoring, you've got you're monitoring raw water and finished water. Are you seeing your existing treatment processes doing well with some of them, and maybe others, not being removed and passing through the plant? I guess is there good news on some things are being addressed very, very well with your existing processes?
I wish, Mark. I think that one of the things I was kind of highlighting earlier is a lot of the technologies that we're utilizing, even with ozone or biofilter. And when I say biofilter, we're actually using anthracite instead of GAC, so we're not getting that benefit there. But a lot of the technologies that we're using, we're not seeing any kind of removal. There's been, we're measuring very, very small amounts. So there's been a few data sets that kind of show like a slight uptick, and you don't know if that's just the sampling procedure itself or what that is exactly. But we've kind of investigated that further. And but generally speaking, what we're looking for, the constituents that I highlighted there, we're not seeing any reduction.
And Melissa, how about at Central Lake County?
So when I look at the data, I can tell you hormones are the one thing that we've detected in the raw, but we do not detect in the finished. So that would lead me to believe that hormones are being removed by our conventional treatment process. Many of the pharmaceuticals as well. So those seem to be the ones that are really being removed in the process. PFAS obviously are not. And it seems like, we used to see quite a bit of cotinine coming through. So the stimulants would come through. Those wouldn't be removed. The artificial sweeteners are not being removed. A lot of times those will come through as well. But the hormones and the pharmaceuticals seem to be removed.
Good. Nice to see that some of those, the ozone and the biofilters can be removing some of that effectively.
Well, Mark, I think that's a really important question, especially as so many utilities are looking to, treat PFAS. You may be one of those luckier water treatment plants where maybe you have deep bed gravity filters where you could change out your filter media with GAC and accomplish some PFAS removal. Maybe you have some pack system that could be those at really high levels that's already installed. So I think it's really important to investigate your existing infrastructure and capabilities for these various CECs.
Great. Yep, that's a great point. Well, with that, I think we could keep going, but we are at the end of the hour. And so I really want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. And also greatly want to thank our panelists for the efforts to join us today, but also to prepare all of the materials that they shared. So be sure to check out AMWA's website for upcoming events, like their Executive Management Committee next month in August, Texas, management conference next month in August in Austin, Texas. Their Q3 virtual membership meeting next week, and the webinar on September 23rd on water pipeline performance and reliability. So a special shout out to AMWA for co-hosting today and organizing the event. And again, to our speakers, GM, Melissa Olenek, and Chase Holmgren for sharing their perspectives. Please take a minute as you exit to complete the evaluation. AMWA will be circulating the webinar recording next week. We greatly appreciate your time with us today and hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you.